Welcome to lesson 1 of the rivers topic for paper 2. The title of the lesson is the drainage basin system, and we're going to get an overview of the drainage basin of a river. I would like you to write down all of the key words highlighted on the right. I've left the definitions out because what we're going to do is, as we work through the video, I want you to pause every time you hear a definition read out, because there's lots of key terms that we need to know. You can either pause it during the video, or at the end, at the point when I say, you can go back and then write out a definition for each of these words.
So welcome to my outdoor classroom. What I'd like you to do is write features of a drainage basin. Now, a drainage basin is the entire area of land that a river drains. So it includes the mountains where the rain falls and flows over the land or through the land and ends up back in the river. I want you to imagine that you are looking from space at the river and the entire area that it drains. Okay, and what I'd like you to do is to draw this in your books. So first off, so I want you to imagine this is maybe, could be 50 kilometers in width. This is the whole area of the drainage basin, like the basin in your bathroom, where if you pull out the plug, which is the river, the water inside the basin drains. Okay, so here's your drainage basin. I want you to imagine that this is up in the mountains. Okay, this part is up in the mountains. On one side the river flows down into India. On the other side, the river flows down into China. The river down into China is the Yangtze River. The river down into India is the River Ganges. Now, what this line, the edge of the drainage basin, is called a watershed. Write this. And the watershed is the dividing line between two different drainage basins. So we're going to take a journey, we're going to take a tour of a drainage basin from the upper to the middle to the lower course. Write this, draw this as you go. So where the river starts, we call that the source. Now the source is in the upper course of the river, and it's no more than about a trickle. It's just a trickle of water. And what you find is then you have tiny streams that start to flow and join up with one another. These tiny streams, which I've drawn here, are called tributaries. Tributaries. Then as we go further down the river, the tiny tributaries start to join up. Now where two tiny streams or tributaries meet, we call that a confluence. What you find is the river starts to get wider as you go further down. So you start at the upper course, then you go to the middle course, and then finally to the lower course. Eventually, the river meets the sea, and that is called the mouth of the river. Going back just a bit, you also find that you have these large bends in the river called meanders, and you find these in the middle stage, the middle course of the river. Right, let's just do a quick recap then. In the upper course of the river, you find the source. This is where the river begins. The source is just a trickle of water. You also find that there are lots of streams. These tiny streams are called tributaries. As you go further down the river towards the sea, the streams start to join up, and where streams join, we call that a confluence. As you go further down the river to the middle course, the river gets wider and you find meanders here, which are large bends in the river. Then finally you reach the mouth. The mouth is where the river meets the sea, and that is in the lower course of the river.
Please identify the features A to F on this drainage basin diagram. Pause the video now. So A was the source, B was the watershed, C was the tributary, D was a confluence, E was a meander, and F was the mouth. Please pause the video and try and identify the features shown on the map. You've got 5 arrows and I want you to write down what you think they are. So this was the tributary. This was the source, confluence, watershed, and then finally the mouth. You're going to be shown 5 figures with multiple choice questions. Now, study figure 1 and identify which one is being shown by the arrow. It was a tributary. This is the second question. There could be more than one. And the answers were C and D. Question 3. Which of the following is the arrow pointing to? The answer was confluence. Question 4. Which of the following statements are true? There could be more than one. Pause now. The answers were A and C. Study this satellite photo carefully and identify 2 features of a drainage basin. There are in fact 4 shown. I want you to identify 2. So we can see the mouth as shown there. We can see a confluence shown here. We can see tributaries shown there and there, and we can also see large meanders. I want to make this slightly different here, where instead of doing an exam practice question, I want you to write a short story of about a paragraph which describes your journey along the course of a river, from the upper course down to the lower course, from the source to the mouth. I've got a word bank and I want you to try and use every single keyword in there. It only needs to be about 6 or 7 lines. Give it a go. Pause the video now and I'll show you an example. Take a look at this example and you can see I've highlighted every single keyword used in the word bank. See if you've done the same and use green pen to correct yours. If the first part of the lesson looked at the features of a drainage basin, the second part of this lesson looks at the drainage basin system. In a moment, pause the video and copy down everything that you see in front of you. You might like to take half a page to do this, maybe even more. So our first process is when the sun heats up the sea or the ocean, causing water to evaporate into water vapor. The first process is evaporation. So as that water vapor now rises, it starts to cool, and as it cools it forms clouds, and this is the process called condensation. The next process is when it rains, but we don't use the word rain because it could be snow, it could be hail, it could be sleet. We use the word precipitation. So precipitation falls on the land, and if you imagine you're out in a thunderstorm and you don't have a bus shelter to hide underneath, the first place you run to is a tree, because the trees intercept the rainfall and they block the rainfall from directly reaching the ground. After that, the water's got three ways to travel. The first is through a process called evapotranspiration. This is when water vapor is released from the leaves of a tree back into the atmosphere. Now, just an interesting fact, the Amazon rainforest creates its own rain. So because evapotranspiration is so high in the Amazon rainforest, it actually creates its own clouds and therefore creates its own rain. So some water is evaporated through the leaves of trees. Some, a significant amount of the precipitation, soaks down through the soil, and that is called infiltration. And quite a lot of water, quite a lot of precipitation runs straight off the surface of the land, particularly in a deforested area where there's less interception, and it runs off the surface of the land back to the lake and river. We call this surface runoff. As water infiltrates through the soil, it can flow through the soil back into the lake and the river. We call this through flow. And the final way that water moves through the drainage basin system is through percolation. This is when water drips through permeable rock underground. Now, once it reaches a layer of impermeable rock, such as granite, it will flow underwater, and we call this groundwater flow. Sometimes it can accumulate underground impermeable rock, such as chalk, and we call this an aquifer, and this is a store of underground water. It's like an underground lake. Okay, so I want you to pause the video and just check that your diagram looks like this. And then what we're going to do is to highlight where you see the flows, where you see the stores of water, and when there are processes. Now processes are where it changes, when water changes from one state into another. So let's go through them. Here is a flow. Here is another flow. Here is another flow. There's another one. And the stores, lakes and rivers, clouds, aquifer, soil is a store of water as well. Then the processes where it's changing. Evapotranspiration. Interception is a process of sorts, even though it's not changing. Condensation, evaporation. We've just got another flow, groundwater flow, and we've got another store here. And then our final flow is through flow. Using the diagram you've just drawn, explain two ways in which water moves through a drainage basin. Best way to do this, note that it's an explain question and it's 4 marks, and you're being asked to explain 2. So we're going to do a point, develop, point, develop. You can choose one of the key words and just explain what it means. If it's about water moving through the drainage basin, if it's about water moving, you can have the keyword with a definition. Once you've done this 4-mark question, I want you to check that you've done number 2 here, to write out the meanings of all the keywords from the start. It might take you some time to do that. So the answers, we could have put precipitation, points, then it flows over the land as surface runoff. There's not really much of an explanation for precipitation. You could have just said infiltration, point, which is when water soaks through the soil. Green pen your work and see if you've got something similar. And there's a number of different answers, as long as you're referring to the way water moves. Please pause the video, answer the questions in the quiz. I've highlighted altitude here. Altitude means height above sea level. So if it's high altitude, we're talking about a place very high up. Please check and correct your answers. The next lesson is lesson 2, the long profile of a river. And again, there's going to be a video of me in my outdoor classroom. Enjoy.